coming up on The Source.
I actually wanted to work with animals. I wanted to work with like the environment.
And a lot of the fights, they go on for a long time.
And we looked at lots of data and we saw again the same thing. We had made progress, things had improved for our community, but we still had a long way to go when it came to housing, when it came to education, when it came to criminal justice, when it goes to economics, when it comes to healthcare. Getting the skill set and getting the information they need to focus on those issues.
Good evening, everyone. It's Kobe Owens here with The Source. As you may see, we're a little shaken up here today, but I have an amazing interview scheduled for y'all today. I want to introduce y'all to a friend and a fellow good troublemaker, Cheyenne Miller, who's an organizer with the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League, the Homes Campaign, and numerous other organizations. And I wanted to have a chance for everyone to get to know who she is as a person, the work that she's working on, and some of the ideas and solutions that she brings to the table to our community. So Cheyenne, first off, how are you doing here today?
Doing good, Kobe. How are you?
I'm doing great. Um, We've been organizing together for a few years now, and I don't think we've ever had a sit down where we actually got to talk about who you are as a person, and letting the community know who you are as well too. So first off, can you give us a little background about you? You have any kids? Are you born and raised here in the city of Wilmington?
Yeah, so everybody asks me if I'm from Wilmington all the time, and I am from Wilmington. I was born and raised in Delaware. I've been born and raised in Wilmington. I do have family that is out from Kennett Square in Pennsylvania, but a lot of where I grew up was in Wilmington. And I went to school at Delcastle, so I'm from here.
All right.
People be asking, like I'm not. I'm from here.
You are. I know we joke a lot about, what side of the city is the best side. North side
West
is
side.
though.
West side. It's okay.
But it's all love, right?
Sure.
So growing up here in the city of Wilmington and seeing the work that you do with the Homes Campaign, which is a housing-based campaign for housing justice, what kind of led you to get into that? Like, what was your background with that?
It's crazy because I don't have a lot of family that works in government, and I don't have a lot of family doing like a lot of activism or advocacy work. And to be honest, I don't even have family that's like doing housing work. I'm one of the few people in my immediate family that owns my home. And so like it's just something that I think as I grew, I kind of had a passion for it. I've experienced homelessness with my family. So when it comes to housing, I know how important it can be and how it can really shift your life and change your life when you don't have it. And so a lot of what I've grown to know is just like my passion, it comes from both lived experience, but it also just comes from the education I've had, knowing that essentially there's very little that you can change in someone's life. There's very little you can do for a person if you don't have stable housing for that person. Like people's success is extremely tied to stable housing, their success in education and career, everything, your health, everything. So to me, housing is just like a basic issue. If we can solve that, I think it will lead to solutions for other areas as well.
Okay. So You said that based on your education and everything, that is what kind of helps guide you
Yeah.
with that. Can you speak a little bit more to your education and
Yeah,
where
my
did you go?
grandma, my great grandmother growing up,
Okay.
she always said education, education, education. And you know, when you're a kid, when she says that stuff and anyone says that to you, you're like, school for real, like nobody wants to be in school. But I actually did not start off going into housing or policy or anything like that. I actually wanted to work with animals. I wanted to work with like the environment. I was kind of one of those little peoples that was out in the woods wherever I could, or walking around the city looking at the plants, looking at the animals. And a lot of what I tried to do was focus my career on becoming a wildlife biologist. So I went to University of Delaware for wildlife conservation. And University of Delaware is a very interesting school because they just recently opened up to allow Black people in. They just recently opened up to allow white women in. And essentially, I got into that school and I was like shocked. I have like went into culture shock because I'm from Wilmington. I'm from the city. I'm from around Black people. So when I went there, I was one of the few Black people that was there. I was surrounded by white people and I was in environmental studies. So I was dealing with a lot of environmental racism, people who had ideas about Black people that just were like antiquated. And it radicalized me. Like it radicalized me to the point where I was like, I no longer care about animals. Now I care about my people and I care about the impact racism has on them and the policies that people make to try to oppress us. So I went from like, oh, we're going to save the animals and I love the trees to Black Power, like very quickly over the course of like 5 or 6 years.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah. And then I went to school in Vermont and studied sustainable development and I studied policy advocacy. And I started to realize that you could, change a lot in the world if you focused on changing policies. And then I also focused on community organizing. You can change a lot in the world if you get people to stand up for themselves and demand the change that's needed for their community. So,
So I would say just seeing the work that you have done, you're very people centered,
yeah.
and building the organizer that you're working with, right? And anyone can be an organizer if you have the right resources. You do a lot of work with Network Delaware. Can you speak to the work that you do there with Network?
I love Network Delaware, obviously. Like anyone who knows me knows that I love Network Delaware. So they started in 2016. And a lot of Network Delaware's focus is around building leaders in the community and civic engagement. And so I'm just like 100% aligned with that idea that people can be trained to make change in their own community, that they can be leaders. I think one of the theories that Network Delaware has is that you can learn to be a leader and that leaders aren't necessarily born and it's not some innate thing. You have the skill set. The other thing I really care about with Network, and then I think Network does a really good job of, is just doing general community organizing trainings. A lot of people kind of look at activism and they're like, oh, all you got to do is be willing to quote unquote speak truth to power. But there's like so much more when it comes to community organizing itself. Like activism is very individualized, advocacy is very like speaking for someone, but organizing is really about you helping people get the skills they need to get themselves to whatever place they want to be in their life, in their community, and being able to transfer those skills to whoever it is that's coming next after them. And so like it's about longevity. Network really like focuses on the longevity of the movement and it focuses on the skill transfer of the movement. So for me, that's like that's what's going to keep us going. That's what's going to keep the movement going. Like it's us being able to focus on people building skills. And I think Network does that. Like they do that perfectly. Like it's what they do.
That's good. That's good. Now, talking about longevity, and a lot of the fights, they go on for a long time.
Oh, God.
Is there something you do, that help get your mind off of always working? What is your favorite self-care? What do you love doing to get away from the work and the
I struggle with
organizing?
that. Like I struggle so bad
I know you do.
with self-care. I have a family. I got a husband, I got 2 kids. So like when I'm not like working, I'm home and I'm taking care of my family and my family's taking care of me. And the best outlet I've always had has been essentially ignoring my phone because I get a lot of phone calls and I do a lot of meetings and just like focusing specifically on the family, focus on the kids, spend the day with the kids, take the kids out, like sit with my husband, do a date night, even if it's a family date night, do something that requires me to essentially put down all of my communication devices and focus specifically on the people that are in front of me. Anytime I get to spend with my family, whether it's like my mom or my sister or my niece and nephews, like I take it because it's very rare that you get a chance to do that work. And then like put it down and actually spend time with the people that you're doing the work for. So I try my best to do it when I can, but it's actually really hard. Like, try.
Trust me, I know.
Mhm.
Even when we don't have to be in the office, I know you're always in the office,
Yes.
work, working. Sometimes surprising all of us in the office as well. My next question is, you do work with a civil rights organization.
Yeah.
That is your day job.
Yep.
Can you talk about the work you do there and why that's so critical?
Yeah, I work with the Metropolitan Women's and Urban League. It's been around for about 20 years. It is an affiliate of a national urban league, which is an organization that focuses on civil rights. If you know about the NAACP, there's like sort of a counterpart called the Urban League. And essentially, the Wilmington Urban League focuses specifically on policy advocacy, policy research, and advancing a lot of the local and the state policies we know that are going to have a positive impact on Black people. So my work there is basically leading the Building People Power campaign. I'm the manager for that campaign, and I do a ton of community organizing work and policy advocacy work.
Nice. For building people power, can you let the people know what that is,
Yeah.
where it came from, and what are the different parts of
Yeah.
it?
So basically, 20 years ago, way before my time, because I ain't that old, y'all. 20 years ago, The Pace of Progress is a book that was written by the Urban League. I believe that the book essentially covered some issues that were around like education and criminal justice, and really just asked the question of where are we as Black people? Where are we as Latinos? Where are we as a community when it comes to how far we've made it in terms of success, when it comes to education, when it comes to criminal justice, when it comes to housing, when it comes to health? And 20 years ago, we had made some progress, but we also had a lot of a ways to go. So, we decided in 2020 we wanted to do another look at where we were and to ask the question, what was the pace of progress? And so we did another report and we looked at lots of data and we saw again the same thing. We had made progress, things had improved for our community, but we still had a long way to go when it came to housing, when it came to education, when it came to criminal justice, when it goes to economics, when it comes to healthcare. We just had a ton ways to go. And so when we did that project, we looked at pace of progress. The Building People Power campaign came out of that saying, hey, well, what can we do to improve things for people here in Delaware, for Black people here in Delaware, for Latino people here in Delaware? So Building People Power does that. We focus specifically on housing, healthcare, economics, criminal justice, and I think I'm missing one.
Environment.
And environment, I believe. Yeah. So we focus on all these different issues. Our whole thing is you're not going to be able to educate your way out of this. You're not going to be able to decarcerate your way out of racism. Delaware has racism embedded in almost every facet of society and in every industry and every sector. So you have to have a multi-issue approach to anti-racism work. Our whole thing is also that you also have to have a community-based approach to it. You are not going to have sustained change if you only have either nonprofits or government people working to dismantle racism. You have to have the community that's most impacted leading the fight for anti-racism. And so our work is literally that, is training up Black and brown leaders to be the ones who go out and fight for the policies we know are going to liberate our community.
There we go. Well, how can people get involved with building people power?
So it's ran through the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. So you would go to mwul.org and you could contact us through there and let us know. Basically, we're a volunteer-led group. What we try to do is get people who want to learn how to do the organizing work and learn about the issues and focus specifically on getting the skill set and getting the information they need to focus on those issues. We do lots of partnerships with different nonprofits that are fighting on the same issues we are. And so there's like tons of ways for people to get involved. And we open people up to a network of other nonprofits that are doing those works as well. So you're not only getting the skills, but you're getting the networking opportunity as well.
Thank you. And I'll put my email out there. If you are interested, my email is cowens, OWENS, at
Yep.
mwul.org. You can shoot
Yep.
me an email. I'll get you in touch with Cheyenne and the Building People Power
Yeah.
campaign.
Yeah.
And kind of what's the timeline if someone, or time commitment, right? So
Yeah.
if someone wants to get involved but only has a few hours to spare, is that okay? Or
Yeah.
do they
Yeah.
need a bunch of time?
So a lot of people always think like, oh, I'm gonna go be a volunteer means that I gotta have like free weekends or free nights. And a lot of times with this work, it's actually not that structured. So a lot of times with the policy advocacy work, there are opportunities that pop up that vary from 2 to 3 hour commitments on a weekend to a 30-minute commitment coming to a meeting real quick and then leaving and after you took an action. Sometimes we ask people to spend an hour helping us do texting campaigns. Other times we'll ask people to spend 3 hours knocking on doors in a neighborhood. So it's really more about what your time commitment is available, like what you're available for and what you can commit to as an individual. It's also kind of based on what your interest is. Some people are like geeks. They don't like to see people and they like to sit at their computer and look things up. They like to do policy research. And Lord knows we need a ton of that. Some people are all about being out and talking to people and knocking on doors and texting people and calling people. And we also have a need for that. Some people like to talk to their legislators. They're always up on the phone. They always send emails to their legislators. And so we need people who do that. It doesn't really matter if you know how to do something with BPP. It's more about what you want to do, what your interest is, and then allowing for us to find the way to train you.
Thank you so much. Look, this has been an amazing interview. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but we will be right back.
Tune in at 8 a.m. every Sunday for our worship services. Join us at 9 a.m. on YouTube and Facebook Live by typing Zion Fair Baptist Church. We are Wilmington's most exciting church.
And we're back. Look, now I want to get a little more into the weeds here. People who watch the show know I'm a little bit of a policy wonk, but so is Cheyenne, and we always have very good conversations about policy, where we believe it should go, and how to make it best when it's centered around people. One of the things that you've been working on, and you spoke to it in the last segment, is housing. You work with the Homes Campaign. So first off, do you want to let people know what the Homes Campaign is?
Yeah, I do want to let people know what the Homes Campaign is. Y'all know I love Homes Campaign, so I'm gonna talk to y'all. Homes Campaign is a volunteer-led group that focuses on housing policy here in Delaware. And our whole focus is that we want to see housing become a human right. And I know that sounds like, well, what does that even mean? There shouldn't be people living out in the streets. We should not have homeless people. We should not have people who are unable to afford rent, unable to afford paying their mortgage. There's no reason why we should have such high prices for housing. There's no reason we should be having all this discrimination in housing. We have lots of policy solutions that have been implemented not only in the United States, but also in other places that can solve a lot of these problems. And so that's what we do. We walk around basically saying to government officials, hey, you should implement good policies that will make it so housing is a human right, so that people aren't having a lot of instability in their neighborhoods. And you should focus it on affordability. You should focus it on accessibility of housing.
What does HOMES stand for?
So HOMES is an acronym. It stands for housing, opportunity, mobility, equity, and stability. So that's kind of like what we want to do like with the world. It shows essentially what we want to see when it comes to housing.
Wow, the person who thought of that must be
Kobe
a
thought of HOMES
genius.
campaigns.
Must
So
be a genius.
what we were gonna come up, we had a really corny name. At first, when HOMES campaign first started, we were gonna call it Housing for Wilmington.
Wilmingtonians for housing justice,
Justice or
something
something like that, because we were very focused on the city, and it really came out of the fight for the against the blight bill, and it was just like real wonky because we're geeks, and he's better at coming up with names than we are. So now we got HOMES campaign. Thank you, Kobe, for the HOMES campaign.
So HOMES campaign is currently in the middle of this legislative session.
Yes.
They have their sleeves rolled up. They are working not just in the city of Wilmington on city-based policy, but also on state policy. And one of the things I've talked about on the show quite often is right to representation and the Homeless Bill of Rights. So first, I'm going to talk about SB1, right to representation.
Yeah.
HOMES campaign has been a critical partner in getting that piece of legislation not only drafted, but so close to the finish line right now. We just have to get it voted on the House floor, right? But it has been a long 3-year journey. So can you speak to what HOMES want, why HOMES wanted to see right to representation, where we're at with it right now, and then if it does pass, signed by the governor, what's next for that?
Yeah. So essentially for us, we do a ton of door knocking, a lot of community-based conversations. And what we've seen is that as time has gone by with the pandemic and even before the pandemic, evictions have been a huge problem. People don't know what to do when they are facing evictions. Some people decide that they're just going to leave as soon as they get a letter saying you haven't paid your rent and I'm going to evict you. And people don't even know that they have the right to go to court and fight to keep their home, to stay where they're at. And then there's also a lot of issues where landlords are taking advantage of people who are basically desperate for housing, because if you can't afford to go anyplace, you're gonna try to stay where you can. And so that combination of having these discussions with people who are having these experiences and people who are struggling to pay their rent and they're doing their best to make ends meet, we just realized that like there has to be something done on the back end of the process where people are facing eviction to provide them with some type of legal help when they go to eviction court. When people have legal help, it changes the entire trajectory of them from being likely to be kicked out, put out in the street, homeless, not knowing where they're going to go next, having this eviction on their record, making it almost impossible for them to get another place to rent, to solving the problem they're having with their landlord, improving the relationship they have with their landlord, and staying in their home. So when we're saying we're fighting for people to have help and legal help, specifically some type of advocate or lawyer when they go to court, it's less about the adversarial process of them versus their landlord and more about having someone there that can help mediate between them and their landlord to solve the problem that they're facing when it comes to their renting situation.
And once this does pass, what happens? What is the next steps for HOMES in regards to right to representation?
So for us, we want to see it pass. So this has been like a 3 or 4 year fight. There have been a lot of people involved, community legal aid, ACLU, a lot of legal aid organizations. And what we've been seeing is that it is hard to pass. We still need to get it through the appropriations committee. We need to make sure that the House members vote for it. We need state representatives to vote yes on SB1. It has to pass that. But once it passes, because we want to see it pass. Once it passes, we know that getting people lawyers when they're facing eviction is an end stage thing. It does not prevent eviction. So HOMES campaign is all for getting people help when they need it. But we want to get to a stage where people aren't facing evictions due to unaffordable housing. We want to get to a stage where people aren't being taken advantage of by their landlords because their landlords know that they don't know their rights. So for us, we're all about making sure that we are shifting things on the front end by providing more affordable housing units across the state of Delaware. We're fighting to make sure that there's more money put into affordable housing, that there are more opportunities for people to access affordable housing, and that there are changes to things like zoning laws so that more affordable housing can be built. And we're also really concerned about making sure that people can afford the rent, because people can't afford the rent right now. And we want to make sure that people know that there is a fair housing law in the state of Delaware and for the United States, and that there are actually legal protections that you have as a renter that will make it so that not only can you access housing so you don't have to face discrimination, but once you get into that housing, there are certain things that you are owed as a renter. If people don't know that, it makes it very easy for them to be taken advantage of. So for us, it's great to have things on the back end to help people when they're facing eviction, but we don't want people to face eviction at all. We want people to access housing, and we want people to stay in their housing. All about stability.
And it's so critical right now, especially with the fact that we are in a deficit when it comes to
That's right.
affordable housing units in the state of Delaware. I know that there are people in the government, people like Secretary of Housing Eugene Young,
Yep.
who are fighting hard to try to address that issue. But until we build 18,000 units
Yep.
overnight,
Yep.
right? It's still so critical for people to make sure people are staying in their homes and have that safe place at night. Also, Holmes has been working on the Homeless Bill of Rights.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So obviously homelessness is a problem. I know a lot of people that are watching your show are probably from the city of Wilmington, so they probably see homelessness in a much more acute way than some people who may be living outside of the city, especially if you're living in more rural areas. But homelessness is actually, it's a statewide issue. People are living in some of the worst conditions. Some people are living outside. Some people are living in their cars. Some people are doubling up with family members or friends because they just don't have a place to go. And getting out of homelessness is extremely difficult. Our concern with homelessness when it comes to the Homeless Bill of Rights is the discrimination that people who are that are experiencing homelessness face when they're trying to access public spaces, when they're trying to access public services. What we're finding is that when someone knows someone is homeless, they get treated completely different than they would if they didn't know they were homeless. And there is no protection in place for people based on the status of their housing. There's protections for your race. There's protections for your gender. In some cases, there's protections for your sexuality, but there's really no protection for your housing status. So you could be sitting in the park, mind your business, and someone could walk up to you, a cop could walk up to you and say, "You're homeless, get out. You're not allowed to sit here," right? You could be sleeping in your car and someone could come and knock on your door and say, "You got to move. You have no place to go. You're doing your best to access whatever resources you can. You're doing your best to survive." And instead of people being provided with the help they need, instead of people being provided with the access they need, a lot of times what happens is they're shunned, they're stigmatized, and they're asked to move along or get out. I mean, the mayor of our city at one point even said that he believes that there's a lot of homeless people that aren't from here, that are here, that shouldn't be here, and he doesn't want them here. And I have a problem with that because I was once homeless in the city. I used to stay at the Salvation Army on Orange Street. I'm from the city of Wilmington. I was homeless here. What? Like, who's to say who's here, who's not? So the discrimination that people face should not be a thing. It does not help people get off the street. It does not provide resources for people to access. And all it does is make the stigmatization worse for people. And it creates unhospitable neighborhoods. So what I'm hoping for is that we can see the Homeless Bill of Rights pass. All that's going to do is create a layer of protection for the current civil rights that someone already has, the current legal rights that someone has. As a person right now, I cannot legally tell you to get off a city bench, right? A park bench. I can't tell you to move along when you're standing in the park, or if you're standing in Rodney Square. I can't be like, get out of here, because you legally are allowed to be there, right? I can't deny you services or deny you the ability to come into a social services building or something like that, because legally that is a right. We're not asking for new rights for people experiencing homelessness. We're asking to enforce the rights they have as humans that are living here, as residents that live here in Delaware, so that people who are experiencing homelessness aren't being stigmatized. They're not being discriminated against. The Homeless Bill of Rights would be a first step and creating a layer of protection for people experiencing homelessness that will allow for them to get access to the resources they need and to better survive so that they can move out of homelessness and hopefully into a housing situation that's dignified, that's affordable, and that's sustainable.
I agree with you. And, my view of it is it strengthens the Public Accommodation Act here in Delaware. And that act is something that my uncle, former state senator Herman Holloway Sr., not only authored, but helped get passed decades ago, right? Especially during the time of the Civil Rights era. So as we continue to fight, um, it's nothing new. This is the same fight we've been fighting for a long time. I think people get very confused sometimes about what homelessness actually looks like. Homelessness could be couch surfing.
Yep.
Homelessness could be staying in your car. There's a lot of different ways an individual can be homeless but still be working as well too. The one last thing I want to talk about, because you were on the scene at North Adams Street when that incident happened, and there has been a lot of movement policy wise since then, by the representative of that area, state rep, former councilwoman Sherry Dorsey Walker. She has a bill right now, HB 37, that speaks to rent escrow. And I know that's something that Holmes has been working on very hard here in the city of Wilmington. And now, thanks to her bill, it's being introduced to be a statewide program. So, can you give us a little more information on that and where y'all stand on it?
Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker, West Side is the best side. She knows what I'm talking about. She, I think, has opened up the door to a conversation that needs to happen for the whole state. So what's happening with the rent escrow bill? It's House Bill 37. House Bill 37 essentially will create rent escrow, where right now there are a few options for people to access rent escrow. And essentially what that is you being able to put your rent aside when you know that there needs to be a repair made and your landlord isn't willingly making that repair or making that repair in a timely manner. Withholding your rent is a legal right that you have. There are rules around it and it's a little complicated, but withholding your rent is a right that you have. And so what escrow does is allow you to place to put that rent. That bill is going to create a court made escrow, and it creates a little bit more of a process for protections for people who want to put their rent aside. The thing about that I think is most important, the way she wrote this bill, is that it also provides an affirmative action for rent. So basically what it says is, maybe you don't know all your rights as a renter, but you know that you shouldn't be living in a house with a leaky roof. You know that you shouldn't be living in a house with mold. So you're going to set your rent aside. But maybe you set your rent aside and your landlord decides they're going to take you to court. And they say, you know what, you're not paying your rent, so I'm taking you to court to evict you. This law would make it, if it were to pass, so that you don't have to worry about being taken to court and not being able to use that as a defense when you say, listen, I was asking for you to fix this thing. You didn't fix it, so I put my rent aside. It's not that I'm not paying my rent. I'm waiting for you to fix this thing so that you can get your rent money. But I'm not going to pay you if you're not going to allow me to live in good conditions. That affirmative action makes it so that people who are currently withholding their rent aren't going to have to worry about when they get in front of a judge that they're going to be kicked out because they were withholding their rent in the wrong way, or they weren't withholding their rent in escrow because there was an escrow account or something crazy like that. So she really, to me, wrote a really good piece of legislation that's getting us back on track when it comes to avoiding situations that are similar to what happened to the Adams Street. But Adams Street was very, very special, and there's a lot more long-term things going on there. So I don't want to say 100% that this bill would have solved that. There's a lot more with that.
And, this is a situation that hopefully we won't see it escalate to North Adams Street,
Oh, God.
right? And I know I say North Adams Street right now because a lot of people heard about that. We made sure it was in the paper. We made sure it was coverage to it.
Yep.
But since then, we've had residents reach out from Milford, from all over the state that are going through the same thing that they're going through, and their landlord or building manager is just completely blowing them off.
Yep.
They're living in horrible conditions. There's a building down in Sussex right now where the bottom floor, you have the first floor, which is the ground floor, and then it has a basement floor that has apartments in it. All the sewage has backed up into those 4 apartments down there. And why they have been moved out, the stink is going up, especially as it gets hotter over these next few weeks, and affecting the other residents in the building. But the building has not been condemned yet. And they're still all required to pay their rent. So this is why something like this is so critical, we think.
Matters for everyone across the state.
Right. We thank Representative Dorsey Walker for bringing it forward, and hopefully we get it done. Right now, it's in the Housing Committee, and Representative Carson, who is a member of the committee, will not show up to the committee meetings.
I have
So
not
we
seen him at any
hope,
committee meeting.
right, we hope that, he finds the courage to start showing up to these meetings and voting in favor of this bill, because there's issues in his own district in Smyrna right now that people have reached out to him about, but because of his personal relationship with the apartment association's lobbyists, he does not want to vote on this bill, which I think is a abuse of power and a conflict of interest. But for this segment, I thank you so much. We're not done yet. I promise you it's going to be amazing. This next segment is something that I've talked about a lot. It's what really kicked off this show, me coming on this show. So we will be right back.
News all across the nation. Wilmington's latest headlines. Advocating for change in the community. With Dr. C.T. Curry, Kobe Owens, and Shanae Darby. Tune in to The Source every Sunday at 5 p.m.
And we're back. Now, Miss Miller, another subject.
Cops.
Yes, policing reform in Delaware and what's going on here. Back in 2020, we worked as a coalition to pull together one of the largest protests in Delaware's history. Thousands of people came out and protested peacefully with us.
Yes.
But we had policy demands. Some have been answered, but our biggest one has not.
So,
And that's reforming
Say
Leah
it.
Board.
say it.
There has been a lot of pushback from the FOP.
Yes.
There's been a lot of pushback from members of the General Assembly,
Yes.
like Frank Cook,
Yep.
Pete Swarthkoff, people who are former officers who have decided to pit their occupation over the safety of African Americans and other minorities here in the state of Delaware.
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying I hate cops. I'm saying that this should be a system that is equitable, which means everyone gets to go home, everyone gets the right to a fair trial, and we're not discriminated against for the sole purpose of the color of my skin. We've seen over the last few years the loss of Lamont Moses, Rodney Reed. We've seen the police shooting at the 7-Eleven. We've seen the young man who was shot over South Bridge. We've seen countless incidents when young teens were injured, left with concussions, broken limbs, fractured bones. In Delaware still has not done anything when it comes to actually holding officers accountable. We saw Derek Chauvin be found guilty, and the other officers who were there for negligence. We don't have that here in Delaware, and that's because we have something called Leah Board. So my first question to you is, in your mind, in your eyes, what is Leah Board and what does it do here in Delaware?
So Leah Board, we're going to always say Leah Board, but it's really the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. And I'm telling you, this is, to me, one of the most insidious pieces of law that make it almost impossible for us to have any type of transparency on who these officers are and what they've done in terms of their misconduct records. And it makes it impossible for us to hold any officer accountable. A lot of people like to talk about qualified immunity and issues about that. This is essentially in that same realm of things. In Delaware, we can't have anyone who can see an officer's misconduct records. It doesn't matter if that officer is accused of doing something bad, if it's caught on camera. It doesn't matter if the media comes and asks for information about an officer's background and what they've done. It doesn't matter if a public defender comes and asks for it. No one can get access to officers' records. And that is scary. You got officers moving in between departments, coming in from out of state, all around. And if an officer has a record that says, hey, maybe they're a bad apple, don't we want to know as a community? Don't we want to have that officer removed? The other thing is, when an incident happens, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights actually protects officers from accountability. Meaning the only people who can investigate when something goes down with an officer is the officer's department, right? The department that officer comes from. The police department cannot effectively investigate itself or its members. That is wild. Like, to think that. That's like me saying, oh, don't worry, I'm going to investigate my own kid if my kid were to commit a crime. Do you think I'm going to investigate my kid fairly if my kid were to commit a crime? No. And so why are we asking for departments to investigate their own officers and expect for a fair outcome, a fair investigation? We can't subpoena records. We can't do an investigation in officers. Even officers don't get questioned the same and interrogated in the same manner. They get breaks that civilians can't get. They get all kinds of protections because of Leobor. And those protections need to go because it essentially makes it so that no one has trust that the officers are going to be held accountable when they do something wrong. No one has trust that their officers are good people because they don't know what their records look like. Here's my thing. If I can look up a teacher's record, a nurse's record, a lawyer's record, a doctor's record, and see where their misconduct is, why can't I look up a record of a police officer who is carrying around a gun, who's carrying around a baton, and has the ability to literally take someone's life?
I agree with you, and I think, just looking here in Delaware at a more recent case with the use of force report coming out, which is the use of force report for Lamont Moses, where a outside entity was contracted by the DOJ to do that investigation once it got to their side of things. This entity, a firm, came in, did their full investigation, and made recommendations and said that why they believe there was gross negligence and that there should be consequences based on the current Delaware law. There is no consequences that they can recommend to actually hold these officers accountable. Yep. Now, since 2020, we have changed a few things, and unfortunately, because of the pace that it took by certain members trying to slow walk progress, the use of force policy in Delaware was delayed. Therefore, the use of force policy was not applied to the Lamont Moses case because Lamont was killed just a few months before it was actually passed. But then we see Rodney Reed killed. And another policy that we pushed for, body-worn cameras, which, again, as chair of the Public Safety Committee and a member of the Council on Police Training, there is a certain representative who has not done his job to make sure that the policy and protocols were put out by the Police Council or the Council on Police Training. And that is that every officer is supposed to have a body-worn camera. It's supposed to be a policy on when and what incidents they are allowed to turn off the cameras and when are they supposed to have them rolling. And if they do turn them off when they're not supposed to, what are the consequences? That has not happened here.
Yep.
We have a federal delegation who worked extremely hard to get money into the state to help get body-worn cameras, to help pay for storage for video cameras. But because the Council on Police Training hadn't done their job, you have police departments like the Dewey Beach Police Department justifying the reason why they didn't have cameras. So therefore, you kill a black man in an alleyway, shooting him while he's running, and it becomes your word versus no one else's because you just murdered someone.
And there's no way to investigate you.
And there's no way to investigate you. As we continue to fight for Leopold reforms, in your mind, your thoughts, what needs to change in Leopold as step one?
Yep.
And then after that changes, what goes towards accountability?
So I talk with a lot of advocates who are fighting to change Leopold. And a lot of times people are like, let's just get rid of Leopold. And I kind of agree, but we got to have something to replace it with, because this isn't just about getting rid of these impunity, the impunity that police have. It's also being able to create a system where we can effectively investigate police, and that we have public transparency with these misconduct records. The whole purpose of us saying we want to reform Leopold is to be able to see, hey, if we do have bad apples in law enforcement, let's look at people's records. What are the records saying about when an incident happens and what's going on with that officer, and if that officer has some actual serious things that they've done that need to be taken into consideration? And then on top of that, let's change it so that we have the ability to investigate. So not only does that mean the subpoena power to get misconduct records, it also means the ability to actually perform the investigation duties that right now we only allow police departments to do. Right now, police departments can look into when an incident happens, and they're the ones who say whether the incident is quote-unquote substantiated or unsubstantiated. We literally have incidences of Wilmington police actually on camera harassing residents. When residents go and say, yo, Wilmington PD, what's up? Can you handle this? The Wilmington PD will come back and say, hey, even though we got this camera evidence of our officer harassing you and saying things they shouldn't say, it's unsubstantiated. We need to go and fix that. When we fix Leopold, we need to replace that language with something that says that we're able to have community review boards that can investigate police, subpoena the police records, subpoena the camera records, all that stuff, the camera, the video footage, everything, and to be able to actually look into recommending discipline when it comes down to it. Because at the end of the day, Leopold makes it so that everything is in the hands of police, and there is no public transparency, there is no accountability methods. And if police are able to be the only ones who substantiate when something happens, nothing is ever going to get substantiated. And so when we're shifting Leopold, we're changing those things. We're changing access to police records, we're changing the power and the ability to investigate and discipline.
Thank you for that. And I know you said some people want to get rid of Leopold altogether.
Which is fine. Just replace it with good language that gives us the power
Right.
to do those things.
But we have to recognize who's in power right now.
Oh, God.
You have a speaker who is a former 20-year vet of the state troopers down in Sussex. And you have other members who are former cops as well, too. Again, when Leopold was created, it was not created for this. But talking to the people who originally crafted Leopold, the FOP president who oversaw the process, who worked with Newcastle County, who worked with the state to put this forth. This policy pretty much came forth because the state did not have the money. The county did not have the money to give raises to the officers, so they asked for policy. For extra protections. That's where Leopold came from. And that's not just a bias. That's coming from the FOP president who helped write Leah Board back in the 80s, who has reached out numerous times, not only to myself, but to members of the General Assembly to say, it has gotten too bad. I'm still back in the blue, but it's no way you could continue to look at what's going on here in Delaware and across this nation and think this is okay.
They need to fix stuff.
But, you know, some people have loyalties to their former occupations.
I think it's more than that, though.
ahead.
Let's keep it real. At the end of the day, in 2020, when we organized that protest, right, the response from Legislative Black Caucus, our Black Caucus members, was that they were going to reform Leah Board for more transparency. Our Black Caucus is not delivered. I'm frustrated with that. Because at the end of the day, y'all promised us that you were going to give us change, and you did not do it. And then on top of that, when we had a good legislative solution to changing Leah Board last year, SB 149, which I thank Tizzy Lockman for all the hard work she did on that, we ended up with a substitute that was informed by the Department of Justice, that was informed by police, that essentially gutted all of the things that we needed. The real transparency, the access to the records, the ability for investigations by community review boards. These legislators want to pass something so they can say, we passed something, okay, leave us alone. And Black Caucus needs to stand up. There's a lot of votes in Black Caucus right now, and put forth a strong piece of legislation that's going to address the issues of that transparency, the issues of making sure we have access to records, the issues of making sure we can actually investigate and subpoena, and not giving us something that's just going to check the box. I'm putting full responsibility on Black Caucus to deliver what they said they were going to give us. And I'm also putting responsibility to go further than what they said they were going to give us, because they promised us something that was only half of the problem. They just wanted to give access of records to public defenders. I want access for everyone. The community should know who's policing their neighborhoods, and they should know that if a police officer does the wrong thing, that they'll be investigated, and it'll be a fair investigation.
I agree with you. And since 2020, we've added 2 of our coalition members who were around to organize the table with us are now members of the Black Caucus. Shout out to Representative Medina Wilson-Anton and also Senator Marie Pickney.
Yep.
But Cheyenne, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show here today.
Thank you.
Again, I know everyone is probably saying this looks like Coffee with Curry, but it's the source, I promise you. Things did get a little shaken up here today, but I think it was a great interview, getting to know one of the most, in my mind, one of the most influential people when it comes to policy in the state of Delaware and just community organizing, someone who I look up to. Again, thank you for continuing to watch the show. Today is technically our 100th show. That's right, 100 episodes of bringing news to you, bringing policy to you. And I look forward to working towards 200 shows as we come up on our 2-year anniversary in just 2 weeks, 4 weeks. I just want to say thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate you watching. This is Kobe Owens.
This is Cheyenne.
Have a good night.
New guests, new conversations, new stories every Sunday at 11 a.m. Grab your cup of coffee and tune in with Dr. Curry for our weekly episodes of Coffee with Curry.